And we're live, and I'm super excited that you guys joined me today. Thank you so much. Today, we are having a conversation from the book, The Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. This is Omuugn, and the world knows him as Omuugn, the wise sage who gives us wisdom and counsel. I know him as my dad, and he's raised 19 kids. And today, we're going to talk on a really interesting topic that comes from page 37. So we're working through this book, and if you have not purchased your copy yet, you can get your copy on Amazon. This is volume number 1 in a 2-part series. I've got the other part here with me as well. We're taking one of these topics week by week so that you can answer questions, you can ask questions, you can work on this in your personal development. And then on Saturday mornings, we come and we join you for an hour of time so that we can discuss the things that we learned together and then get some insights from somebody who has practiced it, who's been in the trenches, and people come all over the world to find the information from him. And so I'm really excited and honored to have him here today. So Moon, thank you so much for joining us today, and how are you this week?
Well, I'm doing well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you. Do you have any updates that you want to give us from last week? Anything you want to share before we jump into today's topic?
Well, we just had our second volume published this week, so we're moving forward on our project, Live with Impact, and I'm excited about it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited. When I got my copy, I stayed up a good part of the night and I read it. I read ahead. I cheated. I'm like, I need more personal development. This is awesome. Ah, well, so today we are covering the topic on anger. And this was really a fun topic for me, not to be angry, but to go through it and to relearn some things that I maybe had forgotten over the years. And then also to focus on some things that I have learned or could use some improvement on moving forward. And this is one of those timely topics that at any stage of your life, there's a proclivity to get angry over certain things, and you can manage it, but it's always one of those things that needs a little bit of constant reminding. So I'm really happy that we're having this topic today. Um, I have a note here, and this is from the book. I'm just going to read right from the book. It says the idea that anger is an emotion that should not control us, but should be controlled by us, is based on the understanding that anger can be powerful and potentially destructive emotion. Share with us a little bit about that and how we go from anger controlling us to how we control it.
Well, I don't want to get too far off base, but emotions themselves means energy in motion. And emotions have two aspects. We put emotions or action into things, energy into things. And then emotion is a circuit. We put energy into things, and then we get feedback through our feelings, which is the completion of the circuit of emotions. So we make choices and we act, and then we get feedback as to whether or not that action was a good action or not. If it's not a good action, we're going to feel negative, we're going to feel frustrated, we're going to feel disappointed, some negative emotion, which tells us that our decision wasn't possibly the best one. So if we think of emotions as an action reaction circuit, then it helps us to kind of put things into perspective. And if our feedback, our feelings are frustrated and we have anxiety, that's going to take us into anger. And that's what we're talking about today. But that's kind of the basis of where anger comes from. It's a feedback from this circuit that we've put into motion. There's a law that says for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And so if our reaction is anger, then we need to consider what the action was that produced the reaction. So that's kind of where anger, where it lives and where it breeds and where it impacts our lives. So emotions follow our thoughts. And if our thoughts are negative, then our feedback is going to be negative. And so we need to control our thoughts, because emotions will follow our thoughts, our intents.
Well, you brought up a really interesting point where you said if we have, and it sounded like a really evolved way to live, if we have awareness of our thoughts, then we can control our anger. Now, in the height of just being really just your blood is boiling and you're just all fussy on the inside, how do you stop and like, wait, hold it, hold everything. I'm going to stop here for a second and just control my emotions. How do you go from a state of just being on fire on the inside to being more calm and able to control that?
Well, one of the keys here is to be aware of whether or not we're acting or reacting. A lot of our anger is in our habitual thinking and in our habitual reacting to things. For example, I knew a fellow at one time who had road rage. If someone passed him on the internet, he would get angry. And then if that person pulled in front of him, the anger would turn to rage. And it was just a reaction that he had, that everyone should consider him to be the king of the road, I guess. And that no one had the right to be on the road at the same time that he was. It was hard to follow his thought or thinking process. But we all have triggers, we all have biases. And if we notice a trait in ourselves, like we become angry very quickly, we're reacting rather than acting. And so, yeah, that's what we have to do, is we have to be aware that there's a situation that needs to be dealt with, or we'll never deal with it.
So, in your experience, is it wiser to prepare in advance how you're going to respond in a particular situation? Like the guy with the road rage, if he were to make a commitment to himself that said, when I get behind the wheel of a 3,000 or a 3-ton car, 3,000-pound car, that I'm not going to experience these emotions? Or do you just try to take it in each drive-by-drive incident where somebody might cut him off and then he's like, okay, in this moment, I'm not going to get upset? Or do you plan that well in advance? What's the answer there?
Well, in this series, this is going to become a very repetitive idea, but the idea is so critical that we need to inculcate it into our very innermost being. And that is, there are universal laws and foundational principles. And whenever we find a negative trait in any of the things that we're going to be talking about, it's because we're in violation, if you will, of one of those principles. And so we need to be very, very familiar with those principles. And too often people go through life without ever sitting down and coming to grips with the idea that there are governing laws that apply to every aspect of our life. That was kind of the purpose of these 2 volumes of work, was to identify all of the different characteristics that a person has. And in some of them we're weak, and some of them we're strong. And we tend to emphasize the ones that we're strong in, but we neglect at times the ones that we're weak in. And that's where things like anger crop out. So we need to be very, very familiar with those principles. And it's true what you say, if we practice responding to even imaginary situations, like if I had road rage, I would imagine people passing me and maybe waving at me and saying, "Hi, good morning." And I would respond back in a positive way. And maybe I could realize that they had an emergency and they were passing me because of some event in their life that was totally unrelated to me on the road. We can create all kind of imaginary situations. And then how would a person responding to a true principle respond to this situation? And then we can practice responding that way. Maybe as they go by us, we could send them a blessing. Father, bless those people, that whatever is causing them to hurry will be resolved in a very peaceful and wonderful way for them. So instead of cursing at people and becoming enraged, we start sending out blessings and positive thoughts to people. That overcomes our tendency to react negatively.
Well, and that's a really good point. I'm married to the guy that has road rage, and he's gotten better over the years. But he's so impatient. Like if we pull up to a stoplight and we're both in the car, instead of stopping at the stoplight, he'll drive through like a gas station parking lot to come out on the other side so he can make a right-hand turn. And in my head, he's going to save what, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I mean, like, how long is the light? And so in my mind, to me, that's an exercise in futility, because when you cut through the parking lot because you're in a hurry or you're all revved up about it, you then have the propensity to get in an accident or to bump into someone else or to ruin their day or cut them off or whatever and trigger something else. And so for me, in my mind, I call it my old granny mode, where we make jokes about the old granny behind the wheel. But if I'm going to get behind the wheel of a car, then I want to make sure that I'm just driving at a safe pace, because for me to bump through a parking lot or to clip up the curb because of the undercarriage of my car hit it or something because I was in a rush, it's not worth it to me. It's just not worth the damage, and it's not worth the stress. And so I'd rather just take the extra 30 seconds and just take a little breather at the light instead of having that road rage. But I find my road rage kicks in when I'm behind the wheel and then somebody else in my vehicle is micromanaging my driving. That's where I kick in, and I'm like, oh, no, you don't.
And another thing that's kind of important that kind of flows along with this, that we've talked about a little bit, is that we need to decide that we will proact rather than react. In other words, I'm not going to feel anything, I'm not going to experience anything unless I choose to do that. I'm going to control my attitude, and I'm going to control my thought processes, because all emotions come from thought processes. And so if we control the thought processes, then we control the emotion. So you need to decide to be proactive rather than reactive in all situations. And if you do that, then nothing really catches you by surprise. If something happens, you always pause and say, how do I want to react to this? And then you make the choice to be proactive, and your problem is solved. Most people don't do that. That's why we have anger issues.
Well,
I won't say most people, but many people.
yeah. I know for years, and as far back as I can remember, I remember that you always having a really strong control over the anger management part of your life. I never saw you yell and scream. You never yelled at us as kids. I never saw you cussing and stomping around and slamming doors and all those things. At what point of your life did you decide that, hey, this is really important for me to lead by example, and I've got all these kids, and I want to make sure that I'm setting an example for them and how they can behave in a certain way?
Well, I guess that's just sort of, it's been a life philosophy for me I call it living to the highest light and knowledge that we have. So I always wanted to be in control of my emotions, my thought processes. And so I would actually spend a lot of time researching and studying those kinds of things so that I could understand how the universal laws operate, because I wanted to flow in harmony with those. And so that's just been kind of a lifelong avocation of mine.
Well, I appreciate you doing that, because I remember as a kid, one time I misbehaved, and it was a really unfortunate series of misbehaviors on my part. And instead of mom yelling and screaming at me or me getting in really serious trouble, we had this great big archway in our house with nails, and there was a nail hanging over a series of the areas of the archway, and there was a little smiley face on each of those little nails. And everyone had an initial of one of the kids in our family. And as we would misbehave while you were at work, Mom would turn our smiley over, and it then became a frown. And then you'd come home from work and you'd look up at the archway, and you would see the smileys and the frowns. And you said, Angela, we need to have a conversation. And so you took me into your den. And it was interesting because instead of yelling at me and making me feel foolish and embarrassed and all these things, the thing that was really important to me is that you sat me down on a chair, and you said to me, and I remember this my entire life, it really left a profound impact on me. You said, I see that your smiley got turned over today to a frown, and I'm really curious to know your reasons why. And you said, I'm sure that there's a really good reason. I would like to know what it is. And you didn't say you misbehaved and it's your fault, and you didn't shame me, you didn't blame me, you didn't embarrass me, you didn't yell at me, there was no smacking me around or any of those things. You gave me a chance. That was a very honorable way for me to explain in my own words what had happened. And when I got done explaining, which is kind of a dumb, lame way that a kid would, I was just acting stupid like a kid, you said, what do you think is a fair punishment? And then you let me choose my own punishment, which was really unfortunate because I think I overpromised. I've been thinking about this for years. I said, I think that I should babysit the kids. And you're like, and I said, and I'll pick rocks out of the garden. We had these buckets of rocks we picked out so they didn't bust the blades of the rototiller. And then you said, and I was like, and I'll help with dishes. And you're like, and I think I overpromised. You kept going. And I just kept promising things to get my punishment down to a place where it reduced my guilt. But you gave me the benefit of the doubt. You were honorable to me. You let me come up with my own reasons why I misbehaved. And I'm curious, as a parent, what was it about your process that instead of shaming and blaming like many parents do, you gave me the benefit of the doubt and you let me explain my own situation?
Well, here's an insight into this process, and you touched on part of it, but you left part of it out. Above each person's name, there were 4 nails. And if someone misbehaved, Mom would say, that's once, and she would raise the smiley up a nail. And twice, and 3 times, and the 4th time, she would turn the smiley over, and that's when the frowny face appeared. So in the process, people had like 3 warnings before the smiley got turned over. And in our home, I was the disciplinarian. I didn't expect Mom to do that. And because I was at work most of the time, I was not emotionally involved in all of this movement on the nails. And so
all the movement. I'd gone all the way up the top of the ladder and got it turned over.
So when I came home and dealt with the frownies, I was not angry or emotionally involved in the decision-making process. So I could sit down very coolly, with a cool head, with reasoning. I'm not the one who had been upset all day turning smileys over. So I could sit down with people and say, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. What's going on? And so I was able to discipline from a cool head, non-emotional head. And if you were a single parent, what you would want to do is maybe put a pause or a time between the infraction and the discipline. Because if you're angry or upset, you have a tendency to be more severe in your decision-making process. So that's the way we did it, and it worked well. I was able to discipline from a cool head and, based on information rather than emotion, and it seemed to work out well for us.
Well, that's a lot of kids under one roof. And so at what point did you discover that you were going to have to manage? I mean, that's not just one kid at a certain age, but that's a multiplicity of kids at a multiplicity of different ages. And we know that kids can pull shenanigans at different ages that are more in tune with their age range than, I mean, you're dealing with all kinds of chaos at that point. How did you manage to keep your anger and your emotions under control so that you could manage all of us and then manage all of our little fights and bickering or whatever it was that we were doing at our ages.
That's a long story.
We don't have a long time, but we got a few minutes.
That would take actually several of these sessions to go through all of that. But I think one of the factors is that the children came along one at a time. So I didn't start out just trying to herd 19 people around. We would just take one or two at a time. And I had this idea in the very beginning, which seemed to be a good idea to me. If I trained the older people to act appropriately, then that's the example that the little people coming along would see. And so they would begin to operate that same way because that's the only thing they knew. Whereas if the older people were like cats let out of a bag and going in every direction and there was just a bunch of chaos, then the younger people coming would inculcate that chaos into their lives. And I didn't want that. So we were pretty structured from the very beginning. Everything was done orderly and assignments were made and everyone knew what the expectations were. These were the days where you had your bath, and after the baths and all of the personal hygiene took place, everyone would line up and we would check behind the ears and check fingernails and make sure that everybody had washed and cleansed properly, and we had processes for just about everything. Fortunately, my wife was the second oldest of 16 children, and so she knew all of those processes. There was no leeway for the children to take advantage of us because she already knew all of the innuendos and all of the excuses and all of the things that would happen in a big family. So as our family got bigger and bigger, we just kept those processes in place and they seemed to work well for us.
Well, I appreciate the processes because I knew how to behave growing up, but I didn't necessarily practice it on the inside. And there are times that I would get really angry on the inside and I'm cussing in my head. We didn't cuss out loud. We weren't allowed to do that in our home, but I'm cussing on the inside. And when I moved away from home, there was really nobody to stop me. And so I remember being in a business situation where I had a business partner and things were not going well. And I was cussing a blue streak. And this is like verbal, I was just spewing it. And I was violently angry as a person. And I didn't really have any reason not to be. I had some very valid reasons to be angry. But I remember disliking myself, saying I don't like the person I've become. I'm cussing and I'm angry and I'm bitter. And I was embodying that on a daily basis because that was the environment that I was in. And instead of changing my environment, I was trying to fight, if you will. And I became just a really volatile person. And I was really unhappy. And it was 1994 when I actually decided that I don't want to be like this anymore. And I'm going to take the initiative of my own to go ahead and make a difference in my life. And so it wasn't until 1994 where I consciously made that vow myself that you had made early on in those years while you were raising us. And so I'm curious if someone has not come to the awareness and they have not taken a vow of I'm going to manage my anger and my emotions, what advice would you give them as far as the frustration they feel on a daily basis, where they are reacting instead of being proactive?
Well, one of the insights that's really helpful is that we are creatures of habit. And if we develop the habit of reacting to everything or becoming angry at certain things, that becomes an habitual process that we go through all of the time. And habitual processes reinforce themselves and create trenches that we live in. And it's hard to break out of those trenches. So we have to proactively create new habits that support what our goals and objectives really are. We have to decide who we want to be. What kind of a person do I want to be? And how would that person respond to the situation? And then create that habit of acting that way all of the time. So, yeah, and there are a lot of factors. Our life has to be balanced. For example, we have the exercise thing. Sometimes we get angry at ourselves because we don't exercise. Or there's our diet. And sometimes we get angry with ourselves because we can't control our diet, of how much we should eat, or what kinds of junk food we should not eat, or all of those kinds of things. And then some of us don't get enough rest or sleep, and so our body is under stress. And there are a lot of different situations that produce the emotion that can lead to anger, disappointment, disgust with yourself, a feeling of not being self-worthy because you can't, keep your life balanced in all of these areas. So, yeah, there are a lot of different factors that need to be considered. Our habits, our health, our the processes that we go through to make decisions, all of those things tie into this, and we need to make certain that we're doing all of the right things, and then all of the right things will result from that. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We need to make sure that our actions are what we want to experience.
Well, and I think there are valid reasons for that. I know that when I married my husband now, he is a very quiet, calm person. And I remember early in the days when we were dating, I got really angry one time. And he said, "Are you breaking up with me?" And I was like, "No, I'm just angry." And I realized that when I got angry, he felt unsafe. He felt unsure about the relationship. And I guess in the past, that was triggered by other relationships that he'd been in, where when the woman in his life got angry or upset, that meant they were breaking up. And I realized in that moment, this is not a good behavior, because when I'm angry, he feels like that's the end of us. And I don't want this to be the end of us. I'm just having an angry moment where I feel like I should be expressing how I feel. And that triggered something in me where I was like, wait a second, I need to be more sensitive to my surroundings and how other people might interpret my anger when I'm just having a moment and he thinks, "Oh no, this is the end of us." Right? I mean, those are two dramatic different extremes.
Don Miguel Ruiz wrote some books that were very insightful. And one of his insights was that people are always reacting to their beliefs and their paradigms, and it really has nothing to do with you.
Hmm.
And so if someone is experiencing something negative, that's something that they're processing, and it really shouldn't impact you at all. And so the only thing you have to worry about is living in accordance with universal laws and foundational principles, and everything else will work out. Everyone has to process. Everyone has to learn to deal with their emotions. And it's an individual process that everyone has to go through. And you really can't control that for other people. You can give them insights like we're doing today, but everyone has to take responsibility for themselves and hold themselves accountable for the kind of life that they're living and the decisions that they're making. There's a law of cause and effect, and if you don't like the effects in your life, start looking at the causes.
Hmm.
And if you change the cause, you're going to change the effect. But being angry with the effect and not dealing with the cause will never be fruitful for you.
Well, I started thinking to myself, if I'm causing someone else to feel insecure about my relationship, and what I'm seeking is a solid foundation to a relationship, I do have control over that. I have control over the way that I blow off the handle or, get all upset or whatever. And so what I decided in that moment is that instead of being that kind of a person, that I wasn't ever going to become angry visibly in a place where other people were afraid to be around me. And I remember that in our marriage, we just celebrated 21 years of marriage. But one of the things that I've just discovered is that if we are angry at each other, it needs to be in a way where we're agreeing to disagree, but in a way that is respectful and there's constructive communication between us. And so what we did in our own home to prevent that, "Oh, I'm just angry and I'm going to fly off the handle," we decided to walk and talk. And so we'll say, hey, let's go for a walk. And that means like, oh no, I'm getting called into the principal's office, you know? So then we'll walk. And as long as we're walking, we're talking, and we'll be talking out the issues instead of yelling and screaming at each other. Because as we walk through our neighborhood, it's hard to yell and scream because the neighbors will see us or they'll hear us. So we got to kind of like keep it low. And then as long as we're walking, we're getting blood circulating through our bodies, and we're releasing those endorphin highs by having physical activity going on at the same time. And if we feel like we haven't ended the conversation, we'll take another lap and we'll walk as long as is needed for us to resolve that issue. And when we come back to the house, we don't bring it back with us. And so it's walking and talking time where we're working through that disagreement, whatever that might be. And then when we get back home, it's a safe place again. And we've declared our home a safe place, just very much like you did when we were growing up, so that it wasn't a frightful place for people to be. And that's become really helpful over the years, because if I have a moment where I feel like, I know that I can't do that at home. The home is not the place. The home is the safe space.
Yeah, and let's differentiate between conflict and anger. Conflict is when people have two different ideas. And those ideas can be about anything in the relationship or work or whatever it might be. And you don't need to get angry or fight to resolve conflict. Going back to the universal laws, there are things that are critically important. For example, communication. A lot of people don't really have communication skills, or they don't understand how to communicate effectively with win-win solutions and with empathy for the other person and things like that. Also, there are listening skills that are really important. If you're thinking about something and the other person is saying something, you have to understand where they're coming from. You have to start listening, not only with your ears, but with your heart and with your understanding. So listening is a skill. Communication is a skill. Implementing all of these qualities, such as the win-win solutions or whatever, there are skills that we develop. And if we do that, anger should never encroach upon us, because conflict is resolved in the very first stages as we communicate effectively and take walks and burn off our would-be anger in exercise and activities and things that we enjoy doing. So there are a lot of ways to solve the issue, but conflicts can be resolved very peacefully.
What do you have to say about biorhythmic up and down days? Because I know that biorhythmically, and this has nothing to do with me being mad at anybody or having any conflict, but I know there are days that I wake up and I'm just really angry for no reason. And I remember, and this is like a rule that I have at my business, when I hire people, one of the very first things I say is, if you're ever having a really bad day and you're just mean and you're mad at the world, that's okay. You get 3 of those days a month. But here's my catch. I want you to take and claim the whole day. Don't be taking 10 minutes here and an hour here and 2 hours here, because that will make me crazy. But if you're having sensitivities, just blanket statement, I'm having sensitivities today. And then all of us will kind of like walk on eggshells around you, right? And I have about 4 of those days a year. And oddly enough, I had one this week. So I went into my team and I said, guys, I'm very cross today. I'm very cross. And they're all like, woo. And I said, I'm going to say what I have to say. And then I'm like going to get out of here, because at the end of the day, I want you guys to still be my friends. And I want you all to show up to work tomorrow. But if I stay in this room, that's not going to be the case, right? I know this about myself. I'm just cross today. What do you have to say about people that they're having a biorhythmic bad day and they're just,
Well, again, we always have the opportunity to choose our attitude, even if we're having a bad day. And one of the best ways to do that, to handle it, is the very first thing when you get up in the morning, just go, wow, this is going to be a beautiful day. This is going to be a wonderful day. And tell the universe that this is going to be a wonderful day. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have a positive attitude no matter what happens. Mm-hmm. And so if you begin the day that way, you'll have very, very fewer bad days. And then we're not going to get too deeply into this because it's a little, I can't say it's off topic, but there is a divine presence that's always available to us. And if we rely upon that, there is help from multi-dimensions for us in every situation. There are higher dimensional beings that are there to help us. We have guardian angels and higher dimensional beings that work with us. They're willing to work with us. They want to work with us. But we have to invite them. We have to say, I desire for you to help me. And I don't feel really well today, so help me feel better. Encourage me. Strengthen me. And we're going to talk about some of these characteristics like determination and self-discipline and controlling ourselves. Those are things that we have to learn to develop. They all don't come naturally to everyone. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. So the purpose behind this whole project was to identify all of those different areas. And where we're having problems in an area, like a bad day, how do you handle a bad day? What should your attitude be? We're talking about energy. How does energy flow? Whenever you sense that energy is flowing in a negative direction, your obligation is to visualize the opposite and start focusing your intent and your energy on the opposite of what's making you feel negative or potentially angry. So we have control of all of those things. If you say, I'm having a bad day, all of you people just look out and be careful. That's because we're not controlling our attitude and we're not controlling ourselves. We're not self-disciplined. And we haven't maybe begun the day properly. So if you're having a bad day, challenge it right in the very beginning. Nip it in the bud. That's what we need to do. We are going to have a good day.
We did practice that, because I'm really glad you brought that up. I know that we hired 3 people one time. We hired them all on the same day, and they were the most negative bunch of people I think I've ever worked with. And they had low self-esteem issues, and they were not happy. And every day they showed up, they gave me all the reasons why they couldn't do their job. And I'm like, what have I gone and done? I've hired these people that were highly qualified. I like these people. I want them to succeed, and I need their help. Why are they selling themselves against this? So we got our little happy belt, and this is our little happy belt. And every day when people would come, I made this a mandatory rule for our office. Every day when they would come, I'd say, how are you today? And there was only one right answer. And the right answer was, I'm beautiful, I'm talented, and I'm wicked smart. And then I would ring the little happy bell, like, ta-da! And we would go around the room, and everyone had to say those words. And they were like, this is so dumb. And I'm like, I know, but the worst thing that happens, if you're beautiful, talented, and wicked smart, then you're in a room surrounded by people that are also beautiful, talented, and wicked smart, right? So now we're elevating ourselves to have a great day today, because this is what we're bringing to the table. And so to this day, and now those 3 people have left the company since then, but everybody now on our team does that every single morning, and then they all have their own little bells at their desk, and they all ring their own bells. And I love that, because by the time we've started our day, which is like 2 or 3 minutes in, everybody has confessed out loud that I'm beautiful, talented, wicked, smart. We hear all these bells ringing, and everyone's like, hooray, it's going to be a great day, you know? And it's a great way to start the day, because it's really hard to backslide into this woe is me victim mentality, or being angry and life is bad and all this stuff, if we've just gone through this whole little, let's remind ourselves how lucky we are that we get to work for ourselves, or that we get to be creative today, or that we get to help other people, or whatever it is we're doing for the day. And so I love that mentality.
Yeah, there are a lot of cultural things that we deal with. Like, it's kind of in our culture that Mondays are horrible because you're just starting your work week, and everyone is looking forward to Friday. And science has actually proven that if you bought a car that was built on a Monday, there's more of a mathematical chance that car will have problems, because people have a kind of a bad attitude on Mondays when they're doing their work. Whereas if you buy a car On Thursday, it's going to be a better car because people are excited about Friday and the weekend coming up, and they have a different attitude, and so it kind of shows in the work that they do and the quality. So yeah, our attitude really determines a lot of things, and starting your employees out with a really positive attitude, well, that's probably why your business is successful.
Well, thank you. So I have a question, and this goes back to, for those of you that are just joining us, hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We're going through the book Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn, and we're on page 39, and we're talking about healthy outlets for anger. And in the book, one of the concepts that we're talking about is ways to find healthy emotional outlets through exercise and journaling, or talking to a trusted friend or therapist. Can you give us a little bit of insights on either how you came up with journaling or an outlet like that that would help work through the anger process?
Well, like I say, I don't start out with anger. I start out with a negative emotion. And if you don't deal with the negative emotion, then it could turn to anger or disappointment or frustration or anxiety or some negative thing. So when you begin to feel that energy is not flowing in the right direction, you need outlets for that energy to redirect it. And physical activity is a great one. If you go for a jog or a brisk walk in the morning, you're going to feel better, and a lot of that negative energy dissipates, especially if you're out in nature and it's not a smoggy day. I feel sorry for people who live in big cities where some of the elements are working against them. Maybe a high crime area where you're anxious anyway. I have the luxury and the benefit of living in an isolated area. There are 354 people who live in my town. It's a very, very small place, and you feel safe everywhere. So we can take walks in nature and exercise, and it's a really exhilarating experience. There are a lot of creative outlets. There are people who are artists or photographers who can go out and look at beautiful things and take pictures or draw or do whatever they do that just channels that energy in a positive direction. I enjoy gardening, seeing the processes of sowing seeds and watching things grow. And of course you have to weed and water and do all the work, but it's an outlet for energy, and you're putting your energy into something that's going to produce. We live in a day where if you buy food in the grocery store, you have no idea where it came from or when it was harvested or the chemicals that are involved, and on and on and on. So raising your own food and being organic and getting your hands to keep my fingernails clean, because I'm working in the dirt and I'm in that process. And so that's where a lot of the energy is redirected for me. Instead of, a lot of people have asked me, why don't you listen to this or that or different things while you're working? I enjoy going inside of myself and analyzing my attitude and different aspects of my character, and I work on those things as I'm involved in gardening and the activities that I enjoy. So yeah, and you can also surround yourself with positive people that slap you on the back or ring your bell or say, hey, you're doing a great job. A lot of times we're around people that are negative. Boy, that shirt looks really bad on you. That color doesn't do you justice, you know. What happened to you? You look horrible today. You look like you're still asleep. Do you have some chronic disease or something? Steer away from those kind of people, because that's not going to help you at all. Surround yourself with really optimistic, happy people with good attitudes, and it will make all the difference in the world. So there are a lot of things like that we can do. Mindfulness, meditation. Mindfulness is being aware in the moment of all the things around you, all the beauty, all of the little miracles that are happening, all the parts of your body that are working. Maybe some don't work, but appreciate the ones that do. And the way your mind works. A lot of people have dementia or Alzheimer's or different things they deal with. If you can think clearly, what a blessing that is. Just appreciate it and be mindful of all of these things that are beneficial in your life. And it will alter your attitude, and it will alter the energy as it flows. Energy is a circuit, and you want to make sure that the circuit completes in a positive way so that the outcome is the outcome that you want. There are causes and there are effects. Make sure your effects are the effects that you want. And if they're not, start looking at the causes, because you can always produce a new cause. In every instant, you can create a new cause that will be a benefit or a beneficial effect that will take place in your life. So live a life of positive causes.
Well, a few minutes ago, you mentioned using physical activity as a way to work through some of your anger management issues. And I remember after that year in 1994, when I decided for me, I'm going to go cold turkey. I'm not going to be the kind of person where I'm stomping around and slamming doors and cussing at people and being unkind. I didn't like myself as that person. And as I made that commitment to myself, I went 9 months without getting angry. And it was really a struggle for me because I was literally consciously aware of every moment on high alert that, okay, now I'm starting to get really upset right now. Don't do it. Don't do it. And for me, what I did was I wore a heart monitor and I turned it down really low. And so every time my blood would start to boil, because I had this, ability to just get really angry and fly off the handle. And then it would set off my heart monitor. It would start beeping. And then I'm like, whoa, I'm really upset. I need to run out and go run around the block and kind of like calm myself down. And I would run around the block until I had calmed myself down and I was okay. I'm in a safe place again. I won't yell at anyone. And I remember 9 months in, something happened, and it was American Express. We had those old alpha pagers where they send you the note. Like the doctors had them, but I thought I was super important. I had an alpha pager. And I was on a business trip and I was about to speak to an audience of about 2,000 people. And they were introducing me, and I was right backstage before I went on stage. And the guy that was introducing me is like, hey, you're on. And I got this alpha text from American Express, and I had a joint business card with my business partner, the one that I got really angry about that triggered this whole self movement of me not being angry. And it said, we've frozen your American Express account and you owe us $43,000 by tomorrow, or we will take action. And my first thought was my rental car for this trip is on that American Express. And I remember flying into this mad rage inside my head because my business partner on this joint business card had spent this much money. I don't know doing what, I don't know. And I flew into this mad rage. And all of a sudden I'm about to go on stage and speak to an audience of about 2,000 people. And I was so unprepared for that moment. And I remember thinking the show must go on. I mean, they paid me to be here and they're expecting me to give a motivational seminar. And I said to the guy that was introducing me, I just had a personal emergency of a business nature. And immediately following, I need to be excused. I can't stay and answer questions or any of those things. I'm not in a place to do that today. And he said, okay, I'll pull you out as soon as we're done. So I went and I gave my speech and I tried to act like, hey, this is what we do. And as soon as it was over, I got in my rental car and I drove to the nearest YMCA, and tears are just streaming down my face. And I didn't have the bandwidth to know how to deal with this situation. And as I don't know, what am I supposed to do? I have no idea. And I wasn't thinking very clearly, and I was going to do something really stupid. And so I put on a pair of running shoes because I always travel with my running gear. But I went to the nearest YMCA, put on a pair of running shoes, and I went out and I ran as hard and as fast as I could, as long as I could. I must have run like 13 miles. And it's really hard to cry and be angry and upset while your body is trying to release like happy, positive endorphins. But I remember as I was running and I was trying to work through this, I was like, what is the lesson behind this? And I remember getting down the road and I'm thinking, hey, wait a second. This is not so bad. Instead of thinking like all the damage you're going to do to this person, you're thinking, what is the lesson behind this? And I'm like, hey, wait a second. I've evolved a little bit. I've grown up a little bit. Look at me maturing, And it was kind of a turning point where I realized that whatever the situation is, I'm going to be okay. You know, this is not the end of the world. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to work through this. I'm going to figure this out. And I don't remember what happened with the American Express. I honestly don't even remember. But we somehow worked it out. We somehow got the cards reopened. I was able to pay for my trip. I mean, somehow I was able to work it out. I don't remember the specifics of it. And to this day, I'm a proud carrying member of American Express, but they didn't like cut me off or anything. But my turning point was realizing that my solution was pounding it out on the pavement, not harming anyone else, taking the matter into my own hands, and knowing that there was a lesson in it and that I was working through it, and that, you know what, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to pull through this. And I'm curious to know what your experience is, because I know you've raised lots of kids, and there have been a lot of opportunities where you've been able to watch the different members of your family going through those moments of just absolute ugliness to try to find some kind of calm and inner balance. What advice would you give?
Well, I've come up with a philosophy that life is a progression of Plan B. I mean, that's true. With all of the variables with a large family, nothing ever goes as planned, no matter what it is. And I learned that I have to be able to flow with whatever is happening. I'll have projects that I'm going to work on. I'll have tools in my hand. I'm on my way out to the workshop, and someone will say, someone just called and they have an emergency. Their car broke down in Idaho. Can you go pick them up? And I put my tools down and I go pick them up, and that I just have to flow with that plan B that's taking place all of the time. Sometimes I get projects done and sometimes I don't. But there are always high priority things that need to be done. People have to be dealt with. Decisions have to be made. And we're always going to be confronted with circumstances that we would not choose as the ideal circumstances. We have to have such self-control and discipline that we control our attitude through all of those things. Like you were saying, every circumstance has a lesson. And you're not going to remember what happened to your American Express in that moment, but you're going to remember the lesson that you learned by going to the gym and dissipating that energy in a different way. So forget the moment, forget the circumstance, but don't ever forget the lesson. Your life should be a series of lessons that you learn. Life is a series of decisions that we make and lessons that we learn or don't learn. And that's the whole key to life. Go with the flow with knowledge and with proaction and with a determined way to control your attitude and implement universal laws and foundational principles, and everything is going to work out okay. Like you said, your life is not going to be destroyed in that moment. It's just a bad circumstance you're going through. You're going to learn the lessons and you'll come out a better person, a bigger person, with more control over your emotions, and it will be a valuable lesson for you to learn. So that's all those experiences are.
Have you ever stubbed your toe?
I have.
I have too, and I hate when it happens because that's one of those things, I don't know why, but that makes me really angry, where I feel like I busted my toe and I'm like hopping around and I want to cuss. In order to prevent those moments in our household, one of the things we've done is we have a saying that instead of just randomly cussing, we say, and our challenge and our game for ourselves, and this is me and my husband who play this game, no expression on the face, no cussing, and we say in as monotone a voice as possible, I wish that didn't happen. And it's kind of a joke because it's very hard to do when you're hopping around and there's blood coming out of your toe and you're like all angry and upset with yourself. It's really hard to stop and say, I wish that didn't happen. But what that means in our house is like, oh my goodness, something really bad just happened.
Yeah, I use the term, well, that didn't turn out very well.
Okay. I was going to ask you what happens in your life, or what would you recommend to somebody as a moment where you can like stop yourself from turning into this angry, violent person, and just have like a saying or a behavior that is your default behavior. And it's one of those, like you said earlier, where you prepare it in advance so that when that moment arrives, you're not left caught off guard trying to figure it out and wing it in the moment, but that's your default way that you kind of approach the situation.
Well, when I was a young teenager, I was around in my early years some abusive language, and I decided that I would never swear or cuss or use guttural language. I just didn't want to be that kind of a person. And I made that decision at a very young age. And so all the years that you've known me for a lot of years, I won't tell your age on screen, but I don't think you've ever heard me swear,
No, I haven't.
because I don't swear. If I stub my toe or I get into a bind or if some bad thing happens, cussing doesn't even enter my mind. That's just something that I decided a long time ago was not part of who I am.
Hmm.
So again, if you make those decisions and you practice the way you want to live, the way you want to make decisions, it becomes habitual. And so when something happens out of the blue, you deal with it as though it's just a normal experience, because life is a progression of plan B. This is just the next B. Might even be C or D or E, whatever it might be. You're going to react the same way, which is positive energy with a good attitude, and you're not going to become upset and you're not going to become angry. So, yeah.
Do you remember when we were young, we had these little tiny weeble people? They were like little egg-shaped people, and they would like didn't stand up straight, they would wobble. And I think
I
their
do.
slogan was like, weeble people wobble, but they don't fall down. And going back to your plan B comment, I know in my business, we're like the little weeble people where something happens and we're like back to plan B and we wobbled a little bit. And it's common in our business. Hey, how you doing today? And somebody will say, I'm wobbling. And what that means is I'm a little weeble people today. And I'm kind of like, I'm here and I'm on plan B and it's not quite what I planned on, but I'm still here and we're going to make it work, you know? And I think it would be fair to say, as we leave our friends today, that our assignment for this week as we work through these chapters, and again, if you're catching up with us, we are doing the insights and wisdom of Omuugn. We're on chapter 3 right now, which is about anger management and how to work through the anger in our lives in a constructive way rather than letting it destroy us. And I think a good assignment for this week would be to go back to the very beginning of this conversation and figure out in advance what we're going to do in a situation of road rage, where before we find ourselves in that situation where somebody cuts us off, how are we going to react? And play it through in your mind, like Omuugn said, in, how am I going to respond to this, and maybe send love to this person, knowing that maybe they're in a hurry or something bad has malfunctioned in their life and that they are in need of kindness and compassion. Let them go on their way, and let's not get in an accident and be all angry and huffy about it. And then also I would like to encourage you, because I forgot about the no cussing thing, but instead of cussing, if you were to create a saying or a moment in your life where it kind of calmed and grounded you, and you were able to express that in a different way, and figure out what that different way is in advance, because nobody's planning to stub their toe. And I promise you this, when that moment happens and you're like suddenly dancing around and you got blood oozing out of your toe, that's not the time you want to be sitting there going, okay, let's see. Yes, I'm supposed to be aware and like have my feelings under control. What am I going to say right now? There's no time to think, right? You got to figure that out in advance. Moon, what advice would you give us as far as a homework assignment of something that we can practice for our anger management this coming week?
Well, no matter what happens, don't respond negatively. No matter what happens, it will not help to slam a door. It will not help to throw things or to break things or to kick things or to scream or yell or do none of that will change the situation. In fact, it creates another situation that might even be worse. So decide that you're going to respond to things to the highest knowledge and understanding that you have. How would the person that I really want to become respond to this? If someone were here who I admire, someone as a mentor, or someone that I really respected, how would they respond to this? And how would they respond to me yelling and screaming and slamming doors? You wouldn't want to demonstrate that to them. So decide that you're going to be self-disciplined and accountable to yourself, and take responsibility for your actions and your thoughts. All of our negative things flow from our own thoughts. So control your thoughts, control your words, control your actions.
That's so good. Thank you so much. Our time is up for today. This has been absolutely fabulous. I'm excited that we're able to have Omuugn give us his words of wisdom. And please join us same time, same place next week as we talk about attitudes and how to change from a negative attitude, which is so intrinsic to most people, to a positive attitude that then sets you on your journey towards life in a positive and helpful way that attracts the right kind of things into your world.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All righty. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks again for joining us. This was awesome. And have a great